seniors have different food needs, and that has to be taken into account if they are to remain healthy. And we are not accommodating that through congregate meals, unfortunately. And it all is probably due to the way things are structured. That is for ease, for a bulk dealing. And I think we need to look at this very carefully, because if seniors lose their muscle strength, they tend to fall. They also cannot regain it unless they take extraordinary measures, and they cannot afford that. So please look into it and make people aware of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to item 1, which is a discussion and/or action and presentations on health-related costs, programs, and policies on food deserts and hunger in Los Angeles. And our first speaker will be Frank Tamburella with Los Angeles Hunger Action Network.
Am I on? Do I need to be on? Okay. Hopefully everyone is doing well tonight. I'm going to go off in a few different directions, and first to talk about the issue of data regarding food security. For the last 2 years, we've been going by the California Health Interview Survey that was released in 2015, but the data is actually from interviews that were conducted as far back as 2011. So we've had a lot of outdated statistics on hunger and food insecurity in Los Angeles, but that situation will be remedied within the next couple of months. The LA County Department of Public Health is going to come out with the updated food security report that's based on 2015 data. And it's going to show a strong connection of hunger to health issues. This is a critical time to be discussing this issue because of what's happening both at the state and the federal level. On the state level, some very good news. On the federal level, likely some very bad news coming up. And the biggest thing that the city of Los Angeles can do is not to provide food bags for people or support particular programs, but speak with a very loud voice on protecting the major safety net programs that we have. Most specifically, SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, known here as CalFresh. The good news from the state side is that for 2 populations that are very vulnerable and who have large constituencies in Los Angeles, there have been modifications of the rules that will make it easier for people to get benefits or will allow people to get more benefits than they previously have. The first group are college students. And there's been several pieces of state legislation that have passed in the last 3 years, including one that just passed about a month ago that basically reinforces the other 2 that enumerate the programs that qualify as work-study for full-time college students. And being enrolled in work-study allows you to get around some of the requirements that you either have to be taking care of a dependent person or have to be working 30 hours a week, 20 to 30 hours a week in order to get benefits. They also are going to require that all the college campuses have a place where students can use EBT cards and, of course, be doing a lot of outreach on CalFresh and mandate basically that college admissions units, student services units help students determine their eligibility and get the paperwork they need to get together in order to qualify for CalFresh. And a lot of this is in response to studies from Cal State University showing that 1 in 10 of their students had an issue getting enough food. The second group that is helped by recent state administrative move are seniors. And for seniors, and in some cases people with disabilities, they'll be able to get higher amounts of CalFresh benefits because when they're applying, they're going to be able to count more of their medical expenses as deductions to their income on paper, which is how they figure out basically how many food stamps you're going to get, how much you're going to get in benefits. I'm going to talk a little bit more about a population that won't be helped by that, which is the population getting SSI. That's supplemental security income. In California, you can't get CalFresh food assistance if you're getting supplemental security income, even if you're getting $1 of it, which applies to a lot of people. And there's 400,000 SSI recipients in the Los Angeles area struggling with food security. And this is a group that's particularly vulnerable and more so than other groups needs a special diet that might cost a little higher. On the federal level, there isn't really much good news to report. The Secretary of Agriculture, Sonny Perdue, of Georgia, who was appointed by President Trump, originally had spoken very strongly in favor of the SNAP program, basically said something to the effect of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, and pointed out how the food industry and hungry people are both helped by this program. He actually had hit the state of Georgia when he was governor there, actually showed tremendous progress in enrolling people in SNAP. However, after being in the political environment for the last couple of months or so, he seems to be more singing the song of Paul Ryan and other of the Republicans who are essentially saying that they want to see some big cuts to SNAP and they want to focus those on single adults who are receiving the program. Most, or many, I should say, of whom in the Los Angeles area, if they're not working 20 hours a week, they're going to be people who are getting general relief, a large part of the homeless population. And so they'll be severely impacted if more stringent work requirements are placed upon them. The county has typically done a very good job of providing some kind of workfare slot or using waivers when those are available for this population. But some of the talk coming from DC is creating a situation where a state couldn't even apply for a waiver, couldn't even step in to help this population on its own. So this is something to be looked at in a couple of different fora over the next year or so, one of which is the Farm Bill that's due in 2018, and that consists of, in addition to the funding for the SNAP program, consists of a lot of agricultural subsidies. But the other is just the general federal budget that's going to be probably taken up as soon as the August recess is over in September. So one of our recommendations for the city of Los Angeles is to prepare to do a lot of strong advocacy out loud for the SNAP program. Our organization is Hunger Action Los Angeles, and we're primarily an advocacy organization that's been working in LA County for the last 10 years, including organizing grassroots participants to training people how to talk to their elected officials, go up to Sacramento, things like that. And we're happy to work with the city and point them in the right direction if their lobbyists aren't already doing so when it comes to hunger, food issues, and in particular the SNAP program. But I want to talk a little bit about hunger too, as in a way that it's a very serious issue, but it can be used as a distraction from other serious issues around it, which elected officials may be more reluctant to take a position on. And what I mean by that is that when you use the word hunger, the term hunger, food insecurity, typically it's a bipartisan issue. It brings people together. It's a soft, cuddly issue. We all want to fight hunger. Everyone wants to pack up bags of food and give them to people. But when you ask about the causes of hunger, which are what we call the pickpockets, you find that hunger is not so much the problem as it is the symptom of the other problems. What's the problem in a country like the United States that produces more than enough food for everyone? It's clearly not that we're not growing enough crops. You just have to walk in the supermarket aisle to see that that's not the case. What it is that folks don't have enough money to buy food. And the reason they don't is because they're spending it on something else. They're spending it on rent, they're spending it on the light bill, they're spending it on transportation, other things that they need to do to get to work. Because if you don't pay the rent, you get evicted. If you don't pay the light bill, the lights get turned off. If you don't buy enough food for yourself, there's no one punishing you except yourself. So these are the pickpockets. Healthcare is a pickpocket. The labor situation with sub-minimum wage, part-time hours, labor violations. But the biggest pickpocket that's more like a highway robber are housing costs in LA. And there's been a lot lately around housing, and we know that the state assembly wants to take it up. The city council has done a couple things, or it's said that it's going to do a couple things. But I think it gets to be very touchy when you talk about landlords and rent control and things like that. That's what you could actually do more than anything else to reduce hunger in LA. Los Angeles now ranks, together with New York, topping the list as the most unaffordable cities to be housed in. That's from a HUD study that was released just last week. The HUD study found that more than half of the million very poor households in Los Angeles spend more than half of their income on rent or resorted to undesirable housing. And this is a study from 2015. So according to Zillow, more than a quarter of all Angelenos spend more than 30% of their income on housing. Coalition for Economic Survival, which is active in LA, states that in the second quarter of 2017, April through June, the city of LA saw 638 more Ellis Act eviction applications filed by landlords and developers. The Ellis Act is a state law passed in '85 which undermines local rent control laws and gives landlords the ability to evict tenants in order to remove housing units from the rental market. And the Coalition for Economic Survival has also worked with the San Francisco-based anti-eviction mapping project. There's a web-based interactive map that shows where LA has lost 22,000 formerly rent-controlled affordable units from 2001 through 2017 due to the Ellis Act. Zillow, which is far from a flaming liberal organization, it's a real estate app basically. They also came out with a study showing that a 5% rent hike in LA County would push 2,000 more residents into homelessness. So we have LA as the most unaffordable city. We have, an organization like Zillow warning about rent hikes putting people in homelessness, and we have Ellis Act evictions. All of this clearly illustrating that housing is really a large part of the root of the hunger situation in Los Angeles. I'm going to talk a little about healthcare as the other pickpocket, but maybe not in the way that you would think. A lot of people are familiar with the food versus medicine dilemma. People have to still pay out-of-cost expenses regardless of Medi-Cal, Medicare, or whatever else they have. And oftentimes, especially seniors and people with very vulnerable health situations have to make a choice between food and medicine. But there's also sort of a twisted way in which this food versus medicine plays out. A colleague of ours who likes to talk to elected officials about his situation, he gets SSI, he has diabetes. He told me, he said, Frank, I could get a little extra money per month to buy the healthy food that the doctors are telling me that I need. But he doesn't have that money. So he gets 3 separate insulins for free from Medi-Cal. So we're basically paying for him to take medicine instead of eat the healthy food that would help improve his situation. The food that would help resolve some of the root cause of his medical condition as opposed to treating the symptoms or acting as like an emergency stopgap. And when he told me this story, there were several other people in the room who basically said, yeah, that's happening to me too. So we're dealing with a health crisis that's exacerbated by food insecurity because people need to eat a lot better food. Ida talked about the situation of seniors, and I'm going to get to them as well. Seniors, especially over the age of 75, have a lot of dietary needs that aren't being met by some of the current programs. So looking at things in a more holistic perspective, bringing together some more people working in the health field, public health, together with those working in food insecurity, would be a step in the right direction. But again, it comes down to some of those pickpockets we talked about, like the housing. I want to bring up the City Department of Aging and the issue of senior hunger. In the summer of 2015, the city conducted a summit on the issue of hunger among seniors. It was a summit that was, I believe it was about 2 years in the planning and making. And it's been just about 2 years since that summit was held. And it was only earlier this year, I think around March, that myself and others were invited by the Department of Aging for follow-up. So we would strongly recommend that the City Department of Aging work faster on implementing some of the proposals that came out of the Senior Hunger Summit. So a lot of attention should be put toward remedying the situation with SSI recipients, of whom there are 400,000 in the LA area, who can't get CalFresh and are subsisting at below 90% of poverty, and by definition are aged, disabled, or blind, and thus not expected to be part of the labor force. We have, a few different slivers of programs here and there. I have a flyer that we prepared for the summit that just shows fast under-enrollment in the senior programs that do exist. Congregate meals is only serving 36,000 out of potentially 500,000 eligible seniors. Only 3.2% of LA County seniors receive CalFresh, and this isn't talking about the people who are getting SSI and can't get it. Meals on Wheels. We do have, the LA Regional Food Bank is doing a fantastic job with the commodity supplemental food program at 144 sites. We have Market Match, but that's serving a very thin sliver of the population. It's not funded on any kind of regular basis. It's constantly having to be patched together. So seniors are an area where the city has already invested some time and energy into bringing people together to come up with solutions, but we don't know what's holding up the process. It took 2 years to plan the summit. It's been another 2 years, and we've only had one follow-up meeting since then. I'm going to leave it at that and, pass on to my colleague, Michael Flood from the LA Regional Food Bank, but I'm happy to answer any questions that people may have.
Great, thanks. So, Commissioner, so we'll next hear from our next speaker, and then if we can ask questions, because we may have questions that need to address either one or the other or both of our speakers. So I'd like to welcome Michael Flood, who is the President and CEO of the Los Angeles Regional Food Bank. Thank you so much for coming, and take it away.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you to the commissioners for hearing about this issue. I apologize for being late, but certainly have heard Frank speak before, and as he does a very good job of setting the stage of what the issues are, and so I was able to hear the latter part of his presentation and would concur with his comments as far as, this is a problem when we're talking about food insecurity that's cutting across age groups, ethnic groups, geographic areas. In my time, in my role with the LA Regional Food Bank since 2000, it certainly is an issue that unfortunately has not decreased and narrowed in terms of scope, but has broadened and has gone from, over the years, somewhat of a what one could consider an inner city and rural problem to now a city, suburban, and rural issue, cutting across a lot of groups. So as Frank mentioned, in terms of seniors, there's a big issue. There's also with families and with children, whether that be two-parent families or single-parent families. They disproportionately show up in terms of in the experiencing food insecurity and struggling. Children themselves, even with access to school breakfast, school lunch, and other programs, there's some challenges there. And of course, and I've read some of the Commission's past reports on the issue of homelessness in the city of Los Angeles, obviously a big issue and a growing issue that requires to be addressed in probably in multiple ways. As you heard from Frank, I think one thing in dealing with the fact that this cuts across so many age groups and people with different circumstances, there's not one solution to this, right? In terms of SNAP, the CalFresh program, can be, for some, maybe a full solution. For some, maybe a partial solution. CalFresh provides, on average, about 2 weeks of grocery buying power every month. For some, that might be the bridge they need to not experience food insecurity and hunger. But for some, even with what they get with CalFresh, it's still not going to be enough, depending on what their circumstances are. What we see in terms of both anecdotally talking to people and also doing surveys of people seeking food assistance is, if I were to put one issue above the others, it would be housing. The housing issue is a huge issue here in the city of Los Angeles and the other cities of LA County. As Frank was mentioning, the Zillow report, unfortunately rents have kept going up. Even with the Great Recession hitting, rents never went down. Housing prices went down at some point. Rents never went down. They've continued to march up. And for too many families and individuals and residents of the city of Los Angeles and county of Los Angeles and the Southland, as we all read, and from a report standpoint, a disproportionate percent of their income is going to rent, if they afford it. And then if not, unfortunately, this is one driver of why we've seen more people living on the street or in shelters or in cars or in other places. So these issues are interconnected. I really applaud the commission, this being a commission about health, taking more of this sort of global approach in terms of looking at how these issues are interconnected. Certainly appreciate that interest, and I think that need is there in order to really address all of these issues. I want to touch base a little bit on the food bank itself, because some of the information I read, I just thought it would be helpful for you to get a little bit of information on how the food bank and our agency network works. I've distributed some information to you. I'm not going to go through each of these documents. Some of this is for your just reading if you so choose to dive into it. So the food bank is a nonprofit organization. We're located here in the city of Los Angeles at 41st and Long Beach in South LA, not far from Jefferson High School. The food bank has been located there since the late 1980s, even though it was founded in the mid-70s. And our core work is one of being a distribution center. So we are bringing food in from a variety of sources. Surplus food, food that by and large is wholesome but needs to be sorted by volunteers and others to make sure it's fit for consumption. And then the most of this food is going out to a network of more than 600 agencies throughout Los Angeles County. We happen to cover Los Angeles County. There are other food banks covering Orange County, Inland Empire, Ventura County, and surrounding areas. So how this network developed over the years is really in two ways. One, and both of these types of organizations exist, although things have changed over time. A food pantry, by and large, is where people are going to get groceries to tide them over. And food pantries really initially were intended to serve people with a roof over their head. They're not meal programs. They're not, by and large, these programs are traditionally serving people who have cooking facilities and will get a fairly substantial food package of fresh produce, dairy products, frozen, shelf-stable product, as nutritionally balanced as possible in order to provide help. What has evolved over time because of the increase in homelessness is the need for food pantries. Not all do this, but some do, to provide what's considered a no-cook food package, right? To recognize that some people coming to their door don't have cooking facilities. Maybe they have housing and don't have cooking facilities, or maybe they're living in their car, or whatever the case may be. And I think in reading a past report from this commission, I would agree that's an area that I think there can be improvements from the standpoint of taking into account that we have people who are homeless seeking food assistance for food pantries. And the food pantries will serve whomever comes to their door. They will not turn people away. So the fact that this is a growing population is something that needs to be looked at, and something really that would require, I think, some city resources, because realize this is by and large a nonprofit network. Half the organizations we serve are faith-based. This is very much shoestring, right? Mostly relying on volunteers, relying on donations of food and funding. So support to help new initiatives, I think, is really something that should be looked at and is important. The traditional provider of people who are homeless are meal programs, soup kitchen, shelters, or whatever the case may be. The challenge there is traditionally the homeless population was in the downtown Skid Row area. So that's where most of those programs are. If you are in the downtown Skid Row area, you will have no problem accessing meals 3 days a week. There's plenty of options from that standpoint. But given the fact that homelessness has expanded throughout the city of LA, then that presents some other challenges, right? In terms of the traditional homeless population being downtown, that's where a lot of the providers are, and that's where a lot of the services are. So I saw that in, I think, something that was released late last year, some commentary about, again, food pantries and providing service. That's correct. Most food pantries are designed to provide people food, let's say, once a month or twice a month, with the understanding that they're in some sort of housing and they're short 3 or 4 or 5 days. But again, the increase in homelessness is certainly something that needs to be addressed more appropriately. So separate from this agency network, so about 600, you can see the list and what was distributed to you. Given that the city is about 40% of the county's population, about 40% of these agencies are in the city of Los Angeles, maybe a little bit higher because of the city's traditional service to people who provide help. And then in addition to that, the food bank is providing and has started programs. Frank referred to one of them, the Commodity Supplemental Food Program, which is providing seniors a monthly basket of grocery items. Again, the targeted population for this program are seniors who are still cooking. This is not a homeless senior program. This is for people who have a roof over their heads. Although if someone comes and seeks food assistance, again, they won't be turned away. But this package is heavily grocery product and is really intended for seniors who are still able-bodied enough where they're cooking their own meals. If they're not, then Meals on Wheels is going to be really the better service for them as people get, let's say, a little bit older or infirmed or having a difficult time preparing their meals. So this particular program is providing seniors. We're at just under 27,000 seniors each month with a pretty substantial food package on a monthly basis. And then in addition to that, we're serving children in some LAUSD schools in an after-school setting. There's a weekend backpack program. We're partnering with Boys and Girls Clubs with after-school supper that I heard on the news today that LAUSD is also running. We try to fill the gaps in LA County where LAUSD or other school districts or Parks and Recs are not providing that service. That program is a summer lunch program during the summer, again, at nonprofit providers, rec centers, libraries, and other places. And then we also have a CalFresh outreach team identifying people who are eligible but not receiving that benefit and doing some things around nutrition education also. And then also looking at the other area I would just comment on that is an important area that fortunately but in a worrisome way we haven't had to deal with here locally recently is disaster relief. So we're part of Emergency Network Los Angeles, which is the local VOAD, volunteer organization acting in disaster. And we've spent a lot of time the last year and a half getting more prepared because, as we all know, really the last major disaster we had here was '94, a long time ago. Most of the people are gone from those roles, both government and from nonprofit. So that's another area that we're focusing on. So that's just a little bit, or probably a lot, on the food bank. Thanks for your patience on that. I know there's been a focus on food deserts, and I think Claire Fox, our colleague at LA Food Policy Council, has made a really great presentation to you on that. And what's also in your packet, we hosted a forum on food waste and food insecurity in May at the food bank, and this is an opportune time because there's a great focus. I mean, food banks started with the food waste issue in the 70s, but because of policy changes and other focus on the issue of food waste, there is, I think, a continued great opportunity to access food that is still wholesome and can be utilized. This isn't just prepared food. This is perishable food, shelf-stable food, frozen, all different types of food, and find ways to feed people in that regard. So there's a paper on that in case you're interested in that as far as sort of the intersection between food waste and hunger. So I'll stop there and appreciate the time and attention of all of you, and be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you. Okay, commissioners, questions. Commissioner Mandel.
Hi. First of all, thank you both for coming to us and educating us. But more importantly, thank you for what you do every day and every week of your professional lives. The city and the county really appreciate your hard work and effort and everything you do. A bunch of questions. What percentage of LA City population is on SNAP or CalFresh? Do you know? Either of you?
Well, I know that in the county, which I think has like 10 million people, there's 600,000 households, representing over 1 million people getting CalFresh. So
about 10%.
10%, yeah.
Okay. However, if I may add, if you wouldn't mind, there's been improvement in terms of the county, how this is measured as percent of eligibles, right? In terms of not everyone's eligible for CalFresh, so the denominator is how many households are eligible for CalFresh. The numerator is how many are actually getting CalFresh. When we started working on this issue, I hate to say how many years ago, 20 years ago, the county was very low, and the state historically has been very low. Less than half people who are eligible for CalFresh were receiving the benefit. So there has been improvement. The county now is at 66% of those who are eligible receiving CalFresh benefits, which, from less than half is a huge improvement. However, the state is at 69% overall, if you take into account all 58 counties of the state. And then on a national average, California is still 48th, 49th, depending on how you measure it, in terms of utilization. So the city of LA, the county of LA, and the state of LA still have a long way to go in terms of utilization. So another opportunity.
Do we have those numbers for the city, or those aren't made available?
I think with some research, they can break it down.
Yeah. There's some, it's not that hard to get to that information, but I think for the city it's not going to be that much different than the county. But yes, I think that
it would be somewhat beneficial to us in that our mission is really for the city, and though we all know that the lines blur, it's important for us for any report that we do. Do you have an idea also in total dollar amounts for either the county or the city in regards to, on an annual basis or monthly basis, how much money is spent in regards to SNAP?
Over $1 billion. Yeah. So, the food bank...
$1 billion for the county?
Pardon me?
$1 billion for the county.
Correct, yeah. So as far as the benefits going out to households, it's over $1 billion. And again, that sort of opportunity of, and there are some states that are at, believe it or not, 98, 99, 100% of eligibles receiving. So, hats off to them for finding ways to be able to make that happen. And that's why there's still like this $1 billion on an annual basis opportunity, right? If we were to drive participation rate from 66% up to 100%, but even if we got halfway there, it's putting another $500 million into, feeding people. And also there's a multiplier effect. For every dollar of CalFresh spending, it's about $1.75 of spending in the grocery side of things. It creates jobs because obviously there's more sales, that type of thing. So there's a significant opportunity there. And just to that end, the County Board of Supervisors, I think everyone's aware, obviously CalFresh is administered by the county, and the County Board of Supervisors passed a motion in May instructing LA County Department of Public Social Services to increase CalFresh participation by 20% next year and 20% the year after. So this is definitely on the radar screen for the Board of Supervisors to try to take advantage of that opportunity.
And then has the total dollar amounts increased since the recession, or has it been about the same either as a percentage or in actual dollar amounts?
So for recipients, there have been cuts. So Congress, there was the ARA, American Recovery Reconciliation Act, put a boost, a temporary boost of roughly, I think, about 5%.
I think it was like 15%.
that high?
Uh-huh. And then, and Congress has instituted a couple of cuts to CalFresh benefits over the last 5 years. So it's, you know, the benefits have decreased somewhat. But if you're a family of three, the average, if for an average household, which is about 2.5 people, their average benefit on a monthly basis is $300 a month in grocery purchasing, which again, obviously for, you know, someone struggling, a household struggling with hunger, that's huge, right? So obviously if it's an individual, that amount's going to be much lower, but on average it's about $300 across the whole program for households.
And then more on a personal basis of your agencies, what are each of your agencies' annual budgets, and where are the top 3 funding sources of your agencies come from?
Ours is around $600,000 a year, and the main source of funding is First 5 LA, and some from the USDA's Food Insecurity and Nutrition Incentive, and the rest is from private foundations.
The food bank, on a cash basis, our budget is $17 million. If you pull up our financial auditor 990, which is on our website, you'll see we're at $89 million because we're required to put the value of the food we're distributing on our financial statements. So that's always a little bit, wow, you know, a pretty big agency, but about 1/3 of that really is cash, 2/3 is in-kind food flowing in and out. The biggest bucket of funding is coming from private, which would be foundations, corporate, individuals, and the like. But if you looked at single source, it would be USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture. We get commodities for pantries and soup kitchens, for the senior program we're mentioning. We get funding for the summer lunch program I was mentioning, an after-school meal. So out of that $17 million cash budget, about $5.5 million is coming from government, really USDA, or through the USDA's California agents, which is, you know, California Department of Social Services and so forth. And then the rest of that funding is private from a variety of sources.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Commissioner Sharp?
Thank you, President Shannon. Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Michael, for taking time out of your Sunday evening, Monday evening. Appreciate you coming down here to City Hall and joining the commission. So thank you for that. I think I need to say to the other commissioners, I have a web of long and elaborate relationships with each of these gentlemen. I'm seriously biased in favor of their comments and recommendations. They've had a number of friendships and financial relationships with both organizations for many years. So please take that under advisement if I'm pushing their recommendations too hard. I think that each of you provided a very thorough overview of what's a big and complex world that involves a lot of money that is available to help solve really important problems. And I think I heard in each of your remarks that I'd love to confirm and underline so it's sort of captured in all of our minds. There are some specific things from your experience that other cities are doing that can be done here, and there are some specific things that I think I've heard each of you say that LA City ought to be doing better. Our greatest leverage is with the city council members who've appointed us, to whom we are accountable and are in the best position to influence relative to all the problems in the world that need to be solved to help address hunger. We can talk to the council members and their offices and their staffs. I think I heard that Department of Aging has had a deck of recommendations for many years, going way back, and crystallized at a summit 2 years ago. So I think it's important for us to try and underline the need for moving fast on that, both in light of the comments from Ida Talala, who addressed us in public comment. I also heard that in the context of this surge of effort to try and respond to the homeless crisis, houselessness crisis, that there are some pilot projects and some innovations underway that are looking at more clever short-term and temporary housing kind of models, and that there may be some room for some innovations to address some of the food nutritional needs of folks that are experiencing a number of conditions along the array of homelessness and houselessness, and that we could potentially be useful in lifting up the need to respond to a couple of those things with greater urgency in our contact with council members and or any publications that come out of this august body. Second, pause. Are there valuable efforts underway to address food insecurity and or hunger that other large cities are undertaking that we could float up as possibilities for Los Angeles to consider. In the process of analyzing legislation and proposals, the city's chief legislative analyst office always includes a bucket of 3 or 4 other cities as compare and contrast. And I'm wondering what some of those models might look like in the universe of hunger alleviation, whether it's city-funded emergency food supports, whether it's city-funded market match as it relates to the program areas you're both most immersed in. Are there some other cities or other templates we ought to be elevating?
I'll go first.
The only thing that comes immediately to mind is to Laurie County. And it was mostly for the benefit of the farm worker population that they were able to waive a lot of the items required in a CalFresh application that there is some leeway to waive. Our county still asks for a lot of documentation, like rent receipts and things like that aren't always readily available to people.
Frank, if I may gently interrupt, there's definitely a very long list of things that we could ask the county to do different.
Right. As far as the
could
city,
be your
city
in particular.
Yeah, that's really difficult for me to put a finger on. I mean, in my opinion, the city, speaking as advocates on the federal and state level, is of paramount importance. The market match program could definitely be helped with city support. We have funding streams that support it for people with kids 5 and under and for people that are using CalFresh, but neither of these funding streams addresses the issue of people getting SSI, which for our organization, that's been a major focus for the last 3 years. This is the population that's in the lowest percentage of poverty that is sort of, the situation tolerates them being in that at that level of poverty without allowing them to access any of the food assistance programs. So funding from the city could benefit the market match program and possibly a couple of other things. Michael has talked about food waste, and I don't know if there are some way that the city could help connect food waste with people who could use it. We got an ordinance passed actually 7 years ago to do that, and it was never really properly implemented. The major donors in that case were the airport and the convention center, which I think have continued to actually do a lot of donations. But the idea is for any other city entities or city functions to channel surplus food to charities that can distribute it.
I would add to that in terms of, I think there's likely an opportunity, given that there's a City of LA ordinance passed around food and surplus food that could go somewhere. It really would require, I think, some city funding to really execute something like that. At times there's this belief out there that, there's food, especially, let's say, prepared food and food that's a little bit harder to capture. If we just make it available, it'll get eaten by someone. Well, not necessarily, right? I mean, there's, again, some health concerns about that food and the like. So that would be one thing that the city has already weighed in on, in terms of the city wants to see food that's wholesome end up someplace. Well, that actually, I think, where the city has fallen down a little bit is, I think that would take some actual piloting of, what that looks like in order for that to occur. There are cities that do utilize city funding to fund food programs, especially kind of the traditional, as I was mentioning earlier, food pantry programs to provide that. I know, and I can get you a list of several that do. I would say that the opportunity, and it might intersect with this commission, is really looking at this issue of people who are dealing with diabetes and other issues that diet contribute to, and looking at kind of a smart investment. Again, maybe sort of piloting, again, we all recognize the city's dealing with deficits, so it's not sitting with, obviously, accounts with surplus looking to spend, but there could be some smart spending there to deal with this issue across the age spectrum, because as we see, health issues that diet contribute to. It's significant. It's not going away. And, again, I think for some of the programs that have been set up, both charitable and government, they didn't have that lens years ago. We've seen school food become healthier. I think, on balance, that's definitely a positive thing. So that's something that might, something the city could do and something that might intersect with this commission in trying to see what could be done to help people who are dealing with, and that can be both homeless and not homeless, right? I mean, that can cut across different populations.
And just to reiterate that, most of the major food programs are federal, state, and county, with the city not really playing a large role. But housing issues are an area where the city is in charge. And as I mentioned earlier, doing something to relieve the burden on renters, to prevent evictions, to help people be able to keep more of their resources in their pocket to pay for food, that, I think, is actually probably the single most constructive thing the city could do to reduce hunger. Now, wage issues are another one, and I know that the city and the county have both been very aggressive lately and done a really great job of pursuing places where they're not paying people the proper wages, where people are getting ripped off. And just in looking at the economy of the city, thinking about what it takes really to live in LA. If we pursue policies that create jobs, but it just creates a lot of part-time jobs, having a large CalFresh enrollment is not necessarily, to me, an indicator of fighting hunger. Creating jobs that keep people above the level where they need CalFresh and well above it, because right now you can be working, and with the housing costs in LA, you're still going to need some kind of food assistance. You could potentially not even on paper qualify for CalFresh, but you're still going to be struggling for food. Michael might even know a little about people who come to the food pantries who don't qualify because their income is too high. But because of the unaffordability of living within the city limits of LA, people are still having to come for food assistance.
Commissioner Mandel.
Do you get your data from the service planning areas, or is it more by zip code, or how does it break down that when you guys get your data from who and what demographic is seeing and getting service?
Well, it would depend. So there's data just for the county overall, not broken down. That can be from federal or state resource. I think the county, LA County, especially public health, has done a good job of breaking things down by service planning area and health district where they can. So you often see that in their reports where they're breaking it down to that level. It's not too difficult to get to city and almost zip code with some of that data. So that's sort of the government collected information. There's CHIS data that's collected at the state level that can get driven down to a fairly localized level. And then for us, for the agencies we're serving, we know where they're located, but then there's a bit of a radius of how far people will travel to get. So that's usually by zip code we're looking at.
The reason I asked the question is it seems to me that being that the largest funder is really federal, right? Even though some of it's matched, that given the number of members of Congress that represent areas of LA County, it'd be interesting if we could get data that was by congressional district.
Yeah, we do have that.
We have it.
So that's available.
Because that would be very interesting for any of our reports, because maybe some of them would wake up to see that they should move it up to the top of their agenda. And clearly there's a lot of things that need their attention, but potentially if there was, more of an issue that was in one CD than another, then a couple of people would take the lead on it. Because I think that sometimes food insecurity is something that doesn't get advocated for individually by members of Congress, but more by a coalition. And that kind of loses something. And maybe if they knew that people were actually holding their feet to the fire, that you'd get a little bit more help in the Beltway.
Good point, yeah. We can.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, I have a few.
Sure.
All right, first of all, I'm just wondering, looking at the cuts, if you guys are looking at, because I know that you get funded, I think both of you from the USDA, if you're looking at cuts for the food bank or for your nonprofit.
Well, we actually had the good fortune of the FINI, Food Insecurity and Nutrition Incentive Funding, was just approved again, and it came out in a press release last week, which was kind of surrealistic considering this administration to see, Sonny Perdue talking greatly about the program. But that's because it had sort of been in the works, so that by the time this year came around, it was basically approved and it was going to go through anyway. Again, on SNAP, the two major things that are being looked at, number one are further restrictions on single childless adults, and number two is restrictions on what you can buy with SNAP. Soda. The issue of whether people should not be able to buy sugar-sweetened beverages with CalFresh dollars, SNAP dollars, which kind of dovetails a little bit with the sugar-sweetened beverage tax issue, which, just in my personal opinion, is, it covers everyone. If we're all contributing to the problem, maybe it's something that should affect everyone, as opposed to singling out, low-income people. But those are the two biggest issues that are going to come up. And those are the issues that have repeatedly been discussed in Congress and in committees, and surveys that have been done over the last couple of years. So look for those kind of discussions in the next year or so.
I would add to that, there have been discussions to block grant SNAP. I'm not sure that will really get there, but that is certainly from the House side of things, what their preference would be, and has been for a while. That's not actually anything new. They've been talking about block granting, not just SNAP, but other programs, and which I think we think would be a disaster for SNAP based on what's happened to other programs that have been block granted through the years. So that's certainly a major concern. The programs that food banks and charitable organizations receive and rely on are very small in terms of the overall federal budget. I mean, they're in the tens of millions and hundreds of millions, where the SNAP overall expenditure is $70 to $80 billion. So that's why SNAP is much more of a target, because it's much larger in comparison to some of these other programs. However, there's still certainly a threat for all of the programs that we're running if there are across-the-board cuts that come in the new federal fiscal year, which could happen. It's happened in the past where, Congress, the administration, or a combination of two, can't figure out what they cut. That they want to cut 20% of non-defense and other funding, non-entitlement funding. Then everyone takes a whack. So that, I think, I haven't heard that discussed yet, but based on experience and seeing what's happened in the past, that certainly is a possibility. If they're talking about tax reform, they've got to get funding on the spending side somewhere too, by at least their past rules. So there's a lot of concern starting October 1. Everything's pretty much settled through September 30th, but come October 1, and I don't think anyone knows what's going to happen. We'll see.
Okay, and obviously in a number of areas we have food deserts, and there's a lack of grocery stores with healthy food. There may be grocery stores or liquor stores, but they don't have healthy food. So can you just enumerate, I guess, for the commissioners who are here, like what specific areas we should be focusing on in terms of addressing that issue?
Well, South LA has been, for a long time, when food deserts come up, South LA and East LA are the two areas that are most often mentioned. And in South LA, they've been talking about bringing in grocery stores since 1992. It's a quarter of a century later, and I think there's actually been a net loss of one store. Sometimes stores are associated with development, and it's not necessarily a good thing for people. I remember there was a big enthusiasm about fresh and easy. There's big enthusiasm about housing along the metro line, and there's also a lot of concern about it, that property values are going to go up if someone's along the metro line and price out the very people who the rail is intended to serve. I remember in discussions with community health councils and Ralph's, the point has been made over and over that South LA has the same purchasing power as Beverly Hills, but that people have to travel actually outside of the city limits of LA to get to any stores that are affordable or that have some of the items that they're looking for. And we asked Ralph's, why the bananas looked so bad at the Ralph's on Rodeo Road, which isn't there anymore because I think they're doing some kind of development there. And they said, well, it's because people weren't buying bananas there. And we said, well, how come they weren't buying bananas there? And what you come to find out is that the grade B product went there first. And so, of course, people didn't buy produce that was looking bad. And then Ralph's would say, well, people aren't buying produce down here. We better not send the grade A product down there. So they kept sending grade B product, and people kept not buying it because you could walk in there and literally the bananas were just ready to disintegrate in the bin. So I don't know if to what extent that's going to change. Like, I don't know what initiatives people have, and that's why I was hoping to get our colleagues from Social Justice Learning Institute or Community Health Councils or the South LA Health Project, because this has just been talked about for so long, and I don't know a lot of the ins and outs of it, and was hoping to bring some of them along. And I think it's something you should have as part of another hearing or an additional hearing, because if people can, there's one of the points that came out of it is that people knew what food they wanted to buy. There were people who would drive all the way to West LA to get the healthier product that they needed. So it wasn't an issue of, well, people are just going to stay satisfied with what's there. It's an issue of dignity and respect. And in the end, it seemed like Ralph's just thought the security cost was too high to put another Ralph's in South LA, or a bigger one, or a better one, or a different one, or one that had a wider range of products. So I think that's for our friends who are more on the trenches in those areas to answer.
I would say I can't speak to that experience that Frank's mentioning in terms of, I think the two opportunities with regards to the food desert issue are, one, as Frank's mentioning, in terms of the grocery store side of things. In South LA, Northgate Gonzales opened. If you haven't been to that market, you should. It's a really, this is a family-run grocery store that has stores from San Diego up to LA. They now have several in LA, and it's a beautiful store in terms of walking in terms of selection and everything else there. And knowing a little bit about, again, the placement of that type of store, I think probably no surprise to anyone, it's not that easy to place anything in the city of LA. It's like, there's a permit process and all sorts of things. So it really takes, the local city council member to get involved, but also funding. There's Fresh Works funding and other things that Cal Endowment has been involved with that I think provides funding for the placement of grocery stores in areas that really need it. But that goes slowly. It would be great if it went faster, but the reality is that takes a long time, I think, to develop those projects. So I think in the meantime, it's the corner store conversion issue, and through LA Food Policy Council that we're a part of, the leadership board, there's been some good work there. That is through City of LA, that is utilizing CDBG funds. So I think there has been some success there, but it tends to be a handful of stores, right? And it's another place where I think the city, if it wants to make a difference, definitely should look at, because I think there's some opportunity there for those stores that have converted and started offering fresh produce and other healthy alternatives. I think from what I'm hearing is they've seen their sales go up, and they've seen some positive sides of things. LA Food Policy Council also does a lot of trainings for the owners of corner stores and smaller markets and so forth, to try to, again, show the fact that to this point there's buying power in your local community. You may not realize it, but the need is more than just some of the offerings in some of those stores. So, yeah, I would agree. The progress is really slow going, and it's another place where, as opposed to some of the issues we've been talking about, like CalFresh, that's run by the county, it's not run by the city. Development is definitely under city purview, and definitely something that I think is a place where the city can increase its involvement and increase its effectiveness.
Okay, Commissioner Vick.
First, I wanted to piggyback or co-sign on Frank's comments. I am one of those people that actually does get in my car. I live in South LA and drive to Culver City to get groceries, or do Amazon Prime Now and have them delivered, but I can afford to do that. And totally realize that there are a lot of folks that don't have that option and are stuck with whatever's around. My other question is around the whole policy on, or hopefully proposed, or whatever's going on with this whole street vendor, food vendor thing. Wondering what your viewpoints are. Is this a viable option as far as food access, getting people access to food? If we can somehow allow folks that are making tamales or selling fruit and license them, is this another way to get food to communities that don't have access?
Well, to me, it's not so much a way of getting food to people as it is a way of getting a livelihood to people. That's obviously the true food security aspect of street vending, is allowing people to work and make their own money. Our organization works with a project together with LA Voice in Ramona Gardens, where we helped several underground, at the time, vendors to become licensed and certified so that they have a legitimate above-ground market. And with much fanfare back in October with the Housing Authority and the LAPD there, I remember the officer talked about how his mom had actually been a street vendor. We got that going, and then this year we helped them out again, and we said we will help pay for your permits, but you have to offer like a healthy item on your menu. So most of them were already doing that. They were selling fruit or aguas frescas that were made from fresh fruit, things like that, or pupusas with zucchini in them. Sort of no food that you buy outside is really healthy, to be honest with you. It all has a lot of fat in it because that's what all of us like to eat. That's what all of us like to taste. So I mean, it's a potential venue for, I guess, potentially for healthy food if you're able to get people to make it in a healthier fashion. But the fact that people already have access to the food and are making it indicates it's not really a situation of nobody had food and now all of a sudden there's street vendors with food. It's the livelihood that it provides to the vendors. Opening up other avenues for people to make money. I remember for a long time they were trying to shut down garage sales and yard sales in LA. And this was at a time when people were losing jobs, and the only kind of jobs that were coming up were temp jobs. Sometimes I think we don't really live in a capitalist system. It's capitalist if you're like already above a certain income level, but if you're at the level where you're just kind of starting off, and Michael talked about permits, and you can imagine permits for the small entrepreneur. I know LA is trying to be more small entrepreneur friendly. Matt and I both know people who are into the whole promoting stuff that's made in LA, handcrafted here in LA. They've actually presented for the mayor on that, and I know that spiritually there's a move toward that, but maybe look at some of the rules and regs and the logistics of that. When you create ways for people to make money, you're fighting hunger. It's as obvious as that. It's like what I said at the very start. It's not hunger, it's all the pickpockets. so housing is a pickpocket, healthcare is a pickpocket, not having access to wages is a pickpocket, not getting paid the proper wage. That's what it is. It's the consequence of all these things. And sometimes it's easier for people to deal with that cuddly, sympathetic image of hunger and let's do something about the food than trying to address some of the harder issues. If they're afraid that they might hurt the feelings of some of their friends who might be landlords, or if they're afraid of someone else who might be offended if they say, hey, we're gonna make ways for more people to make money or hang on to more of the money they have so they can buy enough food. That's what the real hang-up is.
I would say there's an opportunity there. Other cities, New York has sort of a green cart, which I think, again, I haven't followed it that closely, but it seems like it's been successful. Again, it's a place where, you're dealing with people who are their own business owners, and it's a very bootstrap kind of situation, so probably requires some city investment to help kind of get that going. So that would be, I think, a place to look at. My understanding is the city ordinance around street vending is moving through committee, is what I've heard recently. And, maybe by the end of this year, it seems like it's glacial as far as how, it seems like it's taken a long time. Others may know a little bit more about that than I do, but that's the last report I heard on that.
Yeah, to the person on the street, we all heard that something had got passed, and now we're hearing, well, it's passed, but it's not quite passed. So it's just the city process. I mean, even the federal and state government processes are easier to understand than the city. And the last thing I'll say is that maybe street vending will help with food access if the prices are cheap enough.
So where do you see the role of farmers markets and community gardens maybe addressing these issues? And are there enough of them?
Well,
I mean, where do you see that?
We, of course,
sort of
are
movement?
massive supporters of farmers markets because the program that we operate, Market Match, is intimately connected with them. Even though the Market Match concept is now at supermarkets and at neighborhood stores, we feel that with the farmers markets, we're actually trying to go for a four-way win-win-win-win, which is ending hunger, promoting healthy eating, supporting the California small farm economy, and through that, supporting a sustainable environment. Since most of the farmers are using sustainable methods like no pesticides, no harsh chemical fertilizers, the issue is that a lot of the times when I've seen different cities try to start farmers markets, they don't understand what a farmers market is. Some of them, they just want a carnival that's every week. I remember one place where they opened a farmers market and talked about how it was going to help with food security. It was food desert. And in fact, the only certified farmer there was one strawberry vendor. There were 3 other people reselling stuff from downtown. And it was so ironic because we were about 200 yards away from a superior grocer where the food definitely looked better than the food that was supposedly ending this health crisis. And it was kind of depressing because it was obvious that the people in that city, which shall remain nameless, didn't really understand what a farmer's market was. So that's part of it, is educating cities and having cities be more supportive of both farmers markets and gardens. And we've complained about this before, that when there's a ribbon cutting for a farmer's market or a community garden, city council people are right there with the big gigantic cardboard scissors. But when it comes to actually paving the way by easing some of the regulations or some of the financial burdens, they're not there at all. There's an issue right now with water rates for urban gardeners. You can't talk about something and be all glad-handing, pat on the back, and this is so great, we have these gardens and markets on the one hand, and then when no one's looking and the cameras are away, you're issuing the same regulations and fees and so on that are just cutting those places off at the knees. With farmers markets, it's especially really touch and go. It is tough to start one. You kind of have to have the demand and the supply both there simultaneously. And if you don't have the demand, the supply leaves after the first week when nobody shows up to buy anything. They're not going to drive another 100 miles from Santa Maria or wherever, just to sell nothing. So it's a matter of understanding what what these sources really are. And what they are is getting back to the ground in California, this fertile ground that we have here. Our most precious resource in California is our farmers, our farmland, our fruits and vegetables. And figuring out ways that to ease the path for those venues to open up and to introduce more people to them, they could play a much greater role than they do now. I would love for the city to support our market match program, as right now it's the only thing, aside from CSFP, that I can find that's really accessible to that highly vulnerable SSI population that we're seeing out there. And I harp on them a lot because that's been our focus for the last 3 years. It's not tolerable for any other group to be below 100% of poverty, so we can supplement them with CalFresh to make sure they're above that. But this group is below 90% of poverty, and somehow it's tolerable year after year, even though it's a whole bureaucratic mechanism that created that situation. So that's why I talk about it a lot. But from a health perspective, and I just came from a meeting with LA Care earlier today, Market Match has a lot of potential. They want to send folks from their diabetes classes to the Market Match program, get people started eating fruits and vegetables who aren't eating it right now. Market Match, we've done a great job with people who were already eating healthy. We've made it easier for them to continue doing so. What we really want to do is get the thousands of people who we know are not eating healthy, introduce them to some of these other foods, and introduce them on a ground level, not something that's going to blow them out of the water like a celebrity chef. I think a lot of people turn on these celebrity chef TV shows and they've never picked up a pot or a pan, and after 5 minutes of watching it, they're like, I'm never going to pick up a pot or a pan. This is too damn complicated. But, I think both gardening, especially in schools, and markets, they have their own unique sets of challenges. Farmers markets are run by the seat of the pants a lot of times. Community gardens too. If you don't get some people in there who are going to absolutely take responsibility for them, they fall apart. But what they represent is a true, strong effort to create food sovereignty. We're getting our own food from the soil, whether it's from 100 miles away and just driven over fresh, or whether we're getting it out of the ground ourselves. And to learn that self-reliance, it's a very powerful thing. And I think that feeling is disproportionate to the total percentage of food that we're going to be able to get from gardens and markets. It's just not going to happen. I mean, we're all still mostly going to get our stuff from the grocery stores. But to promote those things and to keep those ideas up and to have as many people as possible try them, maybe start eating healthier through them, maybe start appreciating where food comes from, that is where the true value lies.
I think Frank definitely has kind of laid it out in terms of on the garden side. One thing I would mention is as land becomes more expensive in LA, that will put pressure on any gardens that are on land that can be developed to be developed, as opposed to some gardens are on land that really can't be developed because of power lines or other reasons. You see nurseries and others located in some of those areas for that reason. So I mean, when you look at like a city of Detroit, right, which has lots of land, lots of people have moved out of Detroit, there are a lot of gardens. There's a lot of gardening opportunity there. So in the city of LA, there's we do have I think a robust garden network, but it is a challenge with the land issue in terms of saying gardens are going to expand on land that has the possibility of being developed. And then I think Frank's spoke well on the farmers market issue. It's as we were talking about earlier, I think it's one kind of piece of the puzzle that can help, but none of this is going to kind of solve the overall issue.
Last thing I want to add on the gardens is LA has just passed, I think it's now I forgot what it's called. It's the Urban Ag Incentive Zone, which came from Assembly Bill 551 a few years ago. And we have a short window of time in which to get as many landowners as possible to go lease the land out for 5 years as a community garden, and they get what appear to be pretty substantial tax reductions. And it's this window of time that LA has to show a lot of efficacy to this law, or it's going to sunset. The law will come up again at the state level, and the state doesn't like to pass tax breaks. So in order for this to continue in this kind of movement of getting absentee landlords to lease their land out for a guaranteed 5 years to a community organization, and in exchange they get a tax break, and the genesis of the law was because of all the people getting kicked out of their gardens when the landowner decided to sell it. We have a very narrow window of opportunity now, and the city just got through. I think the ink is still drying on the signature. So maybe for them not to drop this issue, but to pounce on it right away. I know that the LA Food Policy Council has been getting more calls than they would have suspected concerning this.
Okay, and then I just have one last question. So I find that it's very difficult for people who are homeless to actually access healthy food. Even in the institutions where they're getting food that's already prepared, like in shelters or any number of places where you can go for hot meals, a lot of times it's very starchy food. For people who have diabetes, it's very difficult for them to eat in places like that. It's also, for some shelters, they can't bring in food from outside, which also creates a burden for someone who's trying to eat healthy. So I'm wondering if either of you are addressing that or have looked at that particular issue.
Well, one of the solutions that was adopted, again, this is more of a county issue, by LA County, was adopting the restaurant meals program in CalFresh. So there's over 1,000 restaurants where a person who, and they have to be homeless or disabled or elderly, can use the CalFresh card to buy meals. Are these healthy places? As I mentioned earlier, anywhere you eat out is not necessarily the healthiest. There are some Subways, some Pollo Locos, and places like that. I think there's about 75 Subway restaurants that are signed up for this. And it's relatively healthy. And then who of us is medically qualified to say how much fat or starch a person who's living literally on the street may need and may need to burn off? But to your point earlier, I do recall the story of a woman who has a former colleague of ours who passed away since, who actually did pass out when she was in a shelter because she had diabetes. And I think you and I probably both know who I'm talking about, who unfortunately passed away from pancreatic cancer a couple years ago. So your point is correct, but for someone who maybe doesn't have diabetes, I'm not so sure that the food coming from a fast food place is necessarily a bad option if you're not getting a lot of meals. So there's the restaurant meals program, but the other flip side to it is the cost, because even stuff that's cheap to those of us who are getting paid every couple weeks, that's going to add up quick. Even if you have like $110 or $150 on your CalFresh card, that's going to be gone pretty fast if you're going even to Subway or Pollo Loco every day. So it's getting that balance, having it spread out enough. Now, I'm going to let Michael jump in, but I want to say that the food bank and many other food banks around the state are bringing in more fresh produce and making it more available to people. You've got the farm to family, and I think there's a couple of other initiatives, right?
Right. Yeah. So I agree with you. I think it's an issue. The food bank started rating the food that comes into us on a nutritional basis 12 years ago. So we take a look at issues such as sugar, salt, fat content, and the like, and that directs our solicitation efforts. We're not interested in the non-nutritious food, and to our agency's credit, they're not either. When non-nutritious food comes in some way, it's the slowest movers. So that has been a focus area. For us, with the agencies that we serve, we encourage also the agencies to pick up food on their own. So your average agency gets about 70% of their food supply from us, and 30% they're picking up on their own. So as far as setting the overall menu at that local agency site. That is an agency responsibility. That's not something we tell them to do. But just as I was mentioning with regards to, for the pantry network, I think it's the same thing with the meal providers. This focus is needed, and it's something we are looking at, but I'd say more in the beginning part of that right now.
Any other questions? I want to thank you both so much for coming and for all the work that you're doing, and this has been very enlightening.
Good. Well, thanks for your interest. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to item number 2. This is a discussion and/or action relative to the Los Angeles City Health Commission retreat schedule and topics. So we did conduct a poll, and it looks like September 1st at 4 o'clock is when most of us can make a retreat. So if we can put that on our calendars, that would be great. I'd like to get some feedback from the commissioners on what they would like to, if there are any specific topics they would like to discuss, what they would like to see in terms of goals. And then hopefully Commissioner Sharp and Commissioner Vick and I will be able to meet sometime soon to go over the agenda. So any thoughts?
Do we have a location?
So we do have a location. One of the commissioners has a place which is on the west side. I believe it's in Venice or Mar Vista. I don't have the address. I didn't bring that with me, but I will send it out. I have sent it out previously. I'm sorry, could you?
September 1st.
It's September 1st, which is a Friday at 4 o'clock p.m. And that was when most of the commissioners could meet.
Did we finish, just in terms of items for the agenda, did we finish the bylaws?
Yeah, so the bylaws are finished. I want to thank Candia Rosales from the city clerk's office for compiling our bylaws for us. They're actually, everyone should have one, okay, at their desk. So those are completed. And if there's any changes or something that we feel that we need to bring back up for discussion, you can let me know and we can put that on the agenda. But I think they look pretty good. I mean, we spent a considerable amount of time at the last meeting. So, Commissioner Vick?
We still have reports to write, correct? Is that something that we need to talk about?
Yeah, so I think absolutely the annual report I'd like to see on the agenda. And this is something where, you know, I'd just like to take suggestions now and then have Commissioner Vick and Commissioner Sharp and I hone the agenda for the retreat. But definitely the annual report, our work groups. I'd like to hear from some community members. So Uduak Natuk, who is our petroleum administrator for the City of Los Angeles, has requested to speak at our retreat and has also requested that we do a hearing in September on the setback from oil drilling. That's something that he is looking at and would like to see a hearing from our commission where you could come and take notes and hear from the various stakeholders. So I'd like to put him on the agenda for the retreat. Commissioner Sharp?
My approach to making the best use of retreats, which I facilitate for a living, I do strategic planning, that's how I get by, is to try to come out of the retreat with some sense for how the mission and vision of the organization are going to be acted on, which is rarely accomplished through identifying specific issues or hearing from specific experts. So if we look at our Article 2 purpose and powers, our bylaws identify 5 functions that we're empowered to do, 4 of which were in the initial ordinance and 1 was added as part of the bylaws discussion last month. My suggestion, if I were being paid to do this thing, the thing I would charge people to do is, no, I'm being facetious about, but this is sort of how I make a living, so this is what I would suggest. You're welcome to propose a different approach. Look at our 5 objectives. These are the 5 things we're supposed to do, and to methodically talk through how each of them are accomplished. And it is not clear to me, as a member of this august body, how all of that happens, because some of this language I don't think clearly leads to a process for an unstaffed entity to achieve. And I think we ought to talk about that and acknowledge those resource constraints and try to select a small number of action steps, sometimes called objectives, sometimes called work plan, that translate these broad, what are called here enumerated powers, into some actions that lead to some results, so that at various intervals, whether 3 months or 6 months or a year, we could gauge whether there's been progress toward these. So my suggestion would be to not bring in specific content area experts, but to try to develop a method whereby each of the specific commitments we've made or actions that we're proposing to take actually happen. It is very probable that because of the priority that the City Council has placed upon identifying the right scientific health nexus for extraction activities, that at some future juncture, it would be valuable to hear from the petroleum administrator who's addressed this in the past. But I don't think that's congruent with my experience in how retreats lead to the right plan of action.
Any other thoughts?
I would agree with what Matthew said. I'd also say that the concept that this commission was created without a significant budget, staff support, and capability of doing the research that we really need to address anything, whether it's today, tomorrow, or 5 years from now, is one that we should really discuss. And that perhaps one of the endpoints of the retreat would be a recommendation, either one of 2 things, to the City Council. One is that we need staff support, including a budget, and if it comes in 3 years or 5 years at some point in time, that's depending on the people in the Budget Committee. But our recommendation is to do that. Or alternatively, that our lack of action, our inability to meet those issues that we were missioned with will continue ad infinitum, because without the capability of having research staff, we're going to find ourselves being not only inefficient, but with 6 members of a body where there are 15 city council people and a population of almost 4 million people, where clearly there are people who could be on this commission that could offer their expertise, but people don't want to join the commission because we don't have the capability of doing anything.
Well,
Any other thoughts?
some time ago I raised the question of
Turn his mic on.
having a strategic plan in place, because it seems as though we're moving from one thing to another, but there's no, for instance, talking about the budget or looking at budget issues should be part of an overall plan in terms of where we're going. There's a mission, we have a mission, but the vision seems to be splintered in different directions, and I would recommend that perhaps we should draw up a strategic plan that we can follow over a period of time. I mean, strategic plans change, but at least if we have some mapping of where we want to go. We're all talking about health and various other things tied into health. And I think it would, be more concrete if we were to have a plan, something that we can follow, and then address any variances from the plan as those ideas come along. So, I mean, an interesting thing today was I kept thinking of Service Area 6 as an area of greatest need, and you've got council members who I'm not sure if they're into some of the things that were talked about today. And how are they involving local churches? I'm sure other service areas may have the same problems too. So I think, again, if we were to look back at what we have and where we're going, I would like to make that recommendation.
Okay, any other thoughts? Okay, great. So public comment. We have a card from Adam Cohen from the AIDS Healthcare Foundation.
Good evening. My name is Adam Cohen. I'm the Director of Advocacy and Policy Research for AIDS Healthcare Foundation. At the last meeting, there was a discussion about the empty seats of the Health Commission, and I just want to let you know I contacted each of the offices of the LA City Council members to ask if they filled a seat or when they will fill the seat. District 1's council member, Cedillo's staff member, offered to let the council member know that the seat is vacant, which is a little disconcerting. District 3 council member, Blumenfield's staff member, said they don't know when the seat will be filled. District 4 council member, Rayu's staff member, said they are interested in filling the seat, which I guess is a good step forward. And District 6 council member, Martinez's staff member, says they don't have any information about the vacant seat. And lastly, District 15 council member, Busquiano's staff member, says they are working on filling the seat. On a different but similar topic of items to discuss at your retreat, I recommend, of course, my all-time favorite topic, which is the rising rates of sexually transmitted infections in Los Angeles and beyond. And lastly, there was a LA Times article that was published today about immunizations, considering, as I found out, tomorrow is the first day of school. And the California Department of Public Health, comparing last year's immunization rates to this year, found that students attending kindergarten have received their required vaccines. The percentage of vaccinated kindergartners is 95.6%, an increase from 92.8%, which is great. But of course, the CDPH also found that despite these improvements, quote, children in schools and communities with lower rates remain at higher risk of contracting and transmitting, of course, vaccine-preventable diseases. 9 out of the 58 counties of California have rates of kindergartners with all required vaccines that are below 90%. And according to the LA Times article, 1/3 of those schools with low vaccination rates were in Los Angeles. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, item number 3, items for future discussion. Are there any items for future discussion that we feel that we need to take up? Commissioner Sharp?
Dr. Mandel, please.
I think at some time we should consider discussing how we increase the number of people that have health insurance, not necessarily Medi-Cal, but health insurance in the city of Los Angeles.
Okay. Commissioner Sharp?
I think we need to elect officers. And I make a motion that the first agenda item at our next meeting be the election of officers, which in our bylaws, I believe, are treasurer, second vice president, first vice president, and president.
Yes.
So I make that
Seconded.
motion.
Yeah, I was planning to put that on the agenda for September anyway, but yeah, you can make a motion.
I think he said, can somebody second it?
I didn't hear. Can you repeat?
You'd like to make a motion that we put officers on the agenda for the next meeting, that we vote on officers.
Okay. Second?
Okay, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
It just left. It was here. Oh, the same thing. We've been trying to get Dr. Ferrer here. So I guess that would be something we can just keep trying to do.
Yeah, so she hasn't been able to make it the last few months. Monday may be a difficult night, but I will try again for September. Okay, great. Any other items? Great, thank you so much. So we'll move for adjournment.
So moved. So, second.
Second.
We don't have to vote on it.